The challenge for every brand at that time was saying, how do we first make sense of the customer through the lens of all this data? It was somewhat exhausting for people to kind of manage all that data.
Everyone wants to deliver that kind of Amazon level experience. They don't understand the 20 things that need to happen to get there.
Our belief at that time was that this has to become simpler because this is going to become so important for every brand. And if it's not simplified, it'll become a...
Today on the podcast, we'll be speaking to Vijay Chittoor, CEO of BlueShift. We'll be able to talk about not just BlueShift as a tool, but really how BlueShift started, the amount of first-party data that now exists, and how tools like BlueShift help marketers to orchestrate that first-party data and make the most of it. And then we'll talk about the importance of having a framework in how marketers use different marketing technology tools like BlueShift, focused on data, delivery, and decision that's really going to impact the ultimate customer experience. And then we'll kind of dig into AI. We'll talk about the importance of leveraging AI in the proper way, using data that's properly structured in a way that allows marketers to use AI to really accelerate the flywheel of marketing. We're really excited about today's conversation with Vijay. Let's get started. Vijay, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. We're really happy to have you and excited you can make the time to be with us.
Thank you for having me. Very excited to have this discussion.
It's great to have someone who really comes from your perspective, because not only do you work at a marketing technology platform, you helped develop and found a marketing technology platform. So you're someone who really needs to understand the challenges, the problems that exist in the market, and then say, how can I help marketers be able to actionably solve those challenges, right? To actually impact the market in a way that's measurable, in a way that's going to help them move their business forward. Now, of course, you spent some time at Mercado helping to co-found that, and then this brought you now to your time here at BlueShift. What kinds of things did you learn along the way that really kind of helped inform what BlueShift has become today and the way that it's able to help your customers?
Yeah, that's a great place to start. So as you noted, prior to founding BlueShift, I had, worked at an intersection of things which led me to where I am today. But really previously founded a social e-commerce company in Mercado, which got acquired by Groupon and became Groupon Goods. And prior to that, I was an AI company, Cosmics, which got acquired by Walmart and became Walmart Labs. And I think what I saw and my co-founders and I together saw at like companies like Groupon and Walmart was that the world around us in terms of how customers interact with brands and how brands are looking to engage them back was changing pretty dramatically. And a couple of changes were very noteworthy. So one, I think when we were prior to founding BlueShift, this was more than 10 years ago now, what we saw in our prior lives was that the amount of first-party data was dramatically increasing, right? So if you see direct customer engagement with brand, which could be captured, recorded in the form of first-party data. It could be digital data. It could be data that's offline but digitized in some form. And I think due to the amount of investments in digitization, due to the changes in digital customer journeys, mobile becoming a big part of the customer journey, the amount of first-party data was kind of exploding essentially, right? And that, at least 10, 12 years ago, that was a huge, huge change. And it has continued since then. And at the same time, what we also saw was that more and more touch points in the customer journey were emerging. And more of these could be influenced by that first-party data, which is really, that data that customers are kind of giving to brands with trust and consent. And the challenge for every brand at that time was saying, how do we first make sense of Shamir as a customer through the lens of all this data? Because obviously, if we did that, we could personalize, we could communicate better with you. And I think beyond that, the other challenge was also about how do we then have consistent, intelligent communications across every different touch point where you're on. Because I think with the amount of data, with the changes in the customer journey, what started happening was that every customer was on their own journey essentially, right? So there were millions of permutations of how customers interacted with brands across different points in time, across different channels and so on. And I think that challenge started, it was a great opportunity. And so on the one hand, you start seeing lots of data, lots of channels. This is awesome. But on the other side, if you talk to people who were actually doing it on the ground, they were overwhelmed. And, it was somewhat exhausting for people to kind of manage all that data, try to make sense of all these customers, try to engage on so many different touch points. And our belief at that time was that, this has to become simpler because this is going to become so important for every brand. And if it's not simplified, it'll become a huge struggle. So the reason we started Blue Shift was about, our thesis was that we could use AI and our background AI to bring a solution to the market which is much simpler, and we can make the lives of marketers who are trying to deal with all this data and connect with customers much simpler. So that's kind of the quick journey, but happy to dig deeper into any aspect of that.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's great because you made me think about a lot of different things there. And I think the first thing that really you helped me focus on was, so we have this great increase, as you mentioned, in this first party data. We have all these various touch points. But I know something you've spoken about a lot, something that we run into a lot in trying to help organizations is the fact that these different touch points become very siloed from each other, right? So they become these siloed engagements that you're having with the customer. And interesting, I know Blue Shift and other tools as well position themselves to provide orchestration. And that's really a great verb to use because it creates a mental image, right? You think about an orchestra and you think about all these instruments, but you think about them having to play in perfect alignment, right, to create the music that you want to deliver to your audience. So in the same sense, you're trying to orchestrate these various touch points so that even though a person may be interacting on an app via SMS, via email, on the website, just to give a few examples, that all those things are delivering the same message at the appropriate time in the appropriate way because you understand the course, the path that you're trying to drive your customer toward, right? You know what you're trying to deliver, right? That final product you're trying to deliver. Is this challenge around orchestration really kind of central to the problems that you're trying to solve with Blue Shift?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we step back a little bit, take ourselves way back in time, right? I think like in the very old days of marketing, you would imagine marketing to be mostly advertising. So you would imagine that it's on a billboard or a TV, ad or something like that. And then the first wave of digital kind of extended that a little bit. So it was email as an advertising mechanism to try and bring people to a website. But really, if you imagine that paradigm, marketing was essentially, driving customers to a destination where they could experience the brand, right? So the marketing itself was not experiential. The billboard was not experiential, but it would tell you to go into a store and you could connect, with the brand out there. And I think what is really changing in the last few years is that now all of these touch points, marketing, advertising, the experience are all much more interconnected and everything is becoming part of the customer's experience. So if you see sort of the shift that brands need to make in the old days, they could really have the customer experience kind of at the customer experience touch points. And then the marketing or advertising, as it might be, was largely detached from the customer, right? Sure, you had to have some customer insights, but it was not about knowing you, Shamir, or me, Vijay, as a customer. That would happen at the experience touch points, and there was a bit of a disconnect between what's happening in marketing and what's happening in experience. And I think now, because of digital, because of interconnectedness, I think every interaction between the brand and the customer is part of that experience. And I think the shift that brands now have to make is to not think of the customer as being disconnected from marketing, but being at the center of everything, right? You start having saying, how do I, instead of saying I need to run a campaign which has a certain number of impressions on, paid media and billboards and TV or whatever that might be, shift that mindset to saying, how do I take Vijay as a customer, Shamir as a customer, and figure out what is the set of interactions I need to orchestrate around that customer, right? And that shift, um, if you don't make that shift in today's paradigm, in today's interconnected world, is just a very broken customer experience. So a lot of brands have started making that shift. It is obviously a hard shift to make because, it goes back to some of the challenges we outlined about, getting the data unified about the customer in the first place and then connecting all the engagement touch points. But if you're able to do that successfully, is really about centering everything around the customer, becoming truly customer centric rather than channel centric.
One of the things that we try to talk about here a lot at Smart Panda Labs is about being people driven, right?
Yep.
And not just simply data driven, but allowing the person to be at the center of the story that you're telling. and thinking about that from that very personal, emotional perspective that people are in when they're shopping, when they're trying to make decisions online, offline, wherever that may happen. So technology is great, right, at empowering marketers to be able to do things, but you still got to come up with a framework that says, how do I put the person at the middle of this to be able to leverage that framework and then leverage the tools and technology, that toolbox, so to speak, right, to be able to build the kind of experience that you want people to have. And I know the framework is a lot of what you kind of talk about. You talked about the 3Ds, right? Data, decision, delivery. Can you talk a little bit about that framework and the thinking behind that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you articulated really well in kind of how you frame the problem. So it's really about trying to connect with that customer as an individual. And the first step to connecting with them is to understand kind of where they are in their journey with you. And that is the data piece, which is really saying, how do I know, firstly, that this individual who I'm seeing on my website or mobile app, uh, you know, by unifying their identities across all these different identifiers of whether it's this device ID is really this person, right? Or this cookie is that real person, or this email address is all that person. And unifying that data, understanding kind of unifying it at the level of like all the different touch points, knowing kind of what support tickets they have submitted to you, when have they called into the call center, what have they purchased or subscribed from your brand. So that is really all about the data. But then you start saying that if you have the data about millions of end customers, everyone is on a unique journey. So what do you say to each and everyone, every individual in this moment? That's where the decisioning piece kind of comes in, right? Because in the old days you could do segmentation. There was not enough data, so you could just bucket like a few 100,000 people into one bucket and say, well, let's just say the same thing to all of them. But if you're trying to truly be customer centric, you're now trying to say, how do I treat each individual as a unique individual, and understand that they might be in a different part of their journey with the brand. They might be interacting on a different channel. And that's where decisioning comes in, about sort of like, how do you take all the data that you have about the person, but also about the crowd, the entire set of like customers you have, and start making smart decisions on what this individual might like based on their own data, but what that individual might be interested in based on the wisdom of the crowds around kind of around in the entire data set. And then finally, once the decision has been made, you also need to deliver that, because we talked about this idea that customers are interacting with you on so many different touch points. So how do you deliver the right communication, and how do you build a system where the decisioning is relayed in a very central form to all these different touch points? That's kind of a good framework to kind of think about the data unification, intelligent real-time decisioning across millions of customers, and then finally delivery across so many different touch points. So those are the 3Ds that I talk about.
And really, right, what we're talking about is trying to drive toward one-to-one personalization, right?
That's right. Yeah.
We're starting with that one-to-many personalization, where, as you mentioned, you have these cohorts of people, and you're kind of treating each cohort differently. People from Florida are different from people from California, right? Or whatever the case may be. But you'd like to get to the point where it's saying, well, what does Shamir want to see? What does Vijay want to see? And how do we surface that information and deliver it to them, not just in the right way, but also in the right time, right? Timing is important too, because you're trying to do that along that journey. So we've touched on it earlier. You touched on the framework that you were talking about, right? Taking the data, going through that decisioning phase, and then ultimately delivering to the customer. Now, how does AI now kind of play a role in that? You talked about, of course, we talked about generative AI. You've talked about customer AI. How do those things kind of play a role in being able to actually deliver and do that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think like AI itself has evolved over time. A lot of what people used to talk about as AI a few years ago was about predictive AI, which would infer maybe what channels might somebody be interested in, or what products or to recommend, and so on. And I think more recently, the advances in AI have included generative AI, which helps create content, as well as agentic AI, which can truly deliver, or do the work of the marketer to take an action, automate at scale. And I think all of these pieces are very important. I think at the heart of it, it goes back to something you said earlier, which is about that storytelling to the customer. So how do you, I think if you frame the problem as, marketers are all about storytelling, and the challenge in today's age is how do I tell a personalized story to millions of customers, right? And obviously, as a that seems mind-boggling at first glance, saying, "Oh my God, like how do I craft a million versions of the story?" But I think this is where AI can start helping you if you, as a brand, can build a framework, build a broad story, set of stories which can resonate with customers at different moments. AI can actually help pick the right elements, maybe personalize on the edges, and assemble everything together and deliver it to the customer at the right touch point. And that's why I think AI can be a very, very powerful companion to a marketer. But obviously, I think the human marketer and that creativity and the brand empathy that marketers bring is arguably more critical than ever, because now you're trying to scale that and you don't want to kind of fall flat without the underlying foundation. So as long as you have that foundation, but if you architect the foundation in a form which can collaborate with AI, I think that's becoming very, very important in today's times.
One of the things that we kind of really get in our soapbox about, right, is the importance of making sure that people understand this is an iterative process. There's not going to be this magic button that you're going to push and all of a sudden everything's going to work and be perfectly orchestrated. It delivers it to your audience, and you're increasing 200% every year over year, right? You've got to experiment. You've got to try different things. You've got to make sure your data is properly aligned, right? You really have to kind of tweak constantly, and that only makes sense. The market's in flux constantly. People are in flux. Your competitors are in flux. So if you're not being iterative about this and you're not saying, how am I kind of navigating through these twists and turns using these different tools in the appropriate way, then you're never going to keep up, right? So we want to make sure that, we really emphasize the importance to the clients that we work with of having that very iterative mindset. And I know you got a similar mindset too, because you and I have talked about this too. You don't think about it just as a funnel, right? You think about it as a flywheel. Like this isn't a one and done kind of thing. This is very much a flywheel of engagement. Why do you think it's so important that brands have that perspective of that flywheel versus that kind of that one-time funnel?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question. I think it goes back to some of the things we talked about earlier in the shift in the world of marketing. So again, if you go back to the world where marketing or advertising is disconnected from the experience, then I think in that world, thinking of everything as a funnel makes sense. Have an impression which is outside of your experience, and then you have a conversion in the experience world. You get people to buy or do whatever action that they need to take. And I think those things are well modeled as a funnel. But I think in today's world, when things are more connected, brands are truly engaging or have an opportunity to connect with their customers on so many different touch points. That connection, every piece of advertising they deliver or marketing they deliver is experiential in some form. And that leads to collection of more data. I think the flywheel model becomes more intuitive for brands, because if they start thinking of like I think the three steps of flywheel are, if you think about data collection or data capture as the first step, the more data you collect, then you activate more data, and then the more data you activate, you deliver some bit of customer delight. And the more customer delight you deliver, you get customers to come back and give you more data because they interact with you, and every interaction delivers more data. And that flywheel is kind of what every brand needs to think about. You can't simply be focused on one pillar of that, which is just data capture, for example. You have to capture the data, activate it in a form that delivers that delight. And that's how you get that engagement flywheel going. And if you do it right, I mean, that flywheel leads to customer growth. It leads to customer value growth at an individual customer level. And I think that's the right way to kind of think about customer journeys in today's context.
People need to understand that AI isn't going to magically make that flywheel begin to turn, right?
Yep.
It can accelerate it, right? But it can't make it just all of a sudden kind of appear and start to turn. And I think sometimes marketers get confused about that. They think that kind of AI is the solution to all the problems, when really it's just an accelerator and helping you move more quickly, right? And get that flywheel turning faster, so that you're able to iterate and keep learning at a greater rate. So that kind of brings me to my next question for you then. since AI can be such a powerful kind of friend and ally in helping that flywheel to turn, what advice do you kind of have out there for marketing leaders in terms of how to get started with AI? I think people hear it a lot, but I think a lot of times people just don't know, okay, well, what does that mean from a very tangible, actionable standpoint? How do I get started leveraging AI in my marketing process, in my marketing campaigns?
Yeah, so I think of maybe two or three things there. So one, I think like kind of when you think about AI, the AI is only as good as the data that you have. So when you're talking about starting off with AI, making sure that your customer data foundation is really, really strong, and that's what's driving the AI to make the right kind of decisions. I think that becomes very important. Second, I think you talked a lot about storytelling. So I think that storytelling aspect is still very, very interesting or very important to the marketing process. And AI can maybe come up with maybe the, you kind of want to pair that right brain, left brain with the marketer and the AI. And making that pairing, investing in the skill set of like of marketers who are comfortable kind of partnering with AI. I think of this term of data artists. So in some ways, like kind of you want marketers who are data savvy, but they don't lose their artistic touch. They don't lose that creativity. They don't lose that storytelling kind of instinct. And I think if you can find like those kind of folks, that becomes very, very critical. So again, investing in a team which has that data artist mindset and is thinking about using AI to deliver interesting, rich stories at scale. That's the mindset I would encourage marketing leaders to foster.
One thing that's come up a lot, even just during the course of our discussion so far, and I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I want this message to resonate loud and clear, is that in order to truly leverage AI, in order to truly leverage orchestration of digital touch points, even AI not even playing a role yet, the data has to be there, and it has to be structured in a way that it can be leveraged and used. And I think both those pieces really need to be emphasized, right? Because I think sometimes marketers don't quite understand, like, hey, you're not capturing this data. So you're asking us to do things, but there's no source of information to use against it to take action. And then sometimes people will say, well, yeah, we have this data, but when we kind of open up the hood, and I'm sure you've seen this, it's like, well, this is a mess. Like this is just stuff that you've shoved into your garage. And it's like, can you go in there and find, the picture from you from high school? Well, it's like, well, right, you can't find it because the data's not organized, right? So how when you have those conversations, which I'm sure you've had with marketing leaders, about the quality of their data and the structure of their data, how do you help them to really understand that this is a critical first step in order to deliver the kind of experiences that people have come to expect? Everyone wants to deliver that kind of Amazon level experience. They want their customers to have that. They don't understand the 20 things that need to happen to get there, and that arguably step one or two of that process is you've got to have the data, and it's got to be structured in a way that's usable.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I think that's where, firstly, I do think marketing leaders, by and large, are coming to that realization more and more. And I think, at least in recent years, there has been a strong resonance when we start talking about this. And then the question is all about the how, right? Like, kind of how do you start on that journey to unify the data? I think you could go down the rabbit hole saying, let's do a 2-year data cleaning project, and we'll start using the data after that. And I think that can be frustrating as well. And obviously, on the other side of the spectrum, you could just be starting off with like data that's not very clean, not very usable, and that can be equally frustrating. So I think the right balance, maybe again going back to that flywheel methodology, you start thinking about all the three parts of the that are driving that flywheel. You think about the data capture, which assumes you're capturing clean data and unifying it. But then you figure out the amount of data that's clean already and usable. Let's make sure to activate that. Let's make sure to deliver like a relevant experience based on just that amount of data, right? And then that will lead to the customers coming back and saying, thank you for adding value to me. And I'll come back and engage more. And in that process, you capture more types of data. And now you have like, as you think about building that flywheel, you can also build your infrastructure, and you can start adding more types of data that are feeding into this flywheel. So that's maybe one way to think about it, which aligns with the end customer experience, but also aligns with a process by which you can get there and you can, truly drive growth in your brand.
I think it's an excellent way to position it in terms of how people can get started because you want them to understand it's not that you can't do nothing today. It's just that you can't get where you want to go until some fundamental, foundational right elements are in place to do that. But that doesn't mean that you can't be moving forward. It doesn't mean that you can't be learning and iterating even before that, and that those learnings and those iterations are going to better inform things when your data is in a position to be able to be maybe a little bit more automated, to be able to leverage AI a little bit more fully, and be able to deliver those kinds of experiences that people are reaching for. So I think that's a great way of positioning it. So, has someone who's been in AI as long as you have, right? Really at the cutting edge of it, how as AI has grown over these past 10 years or so, uh, where do you see it going? In your mind, where do you see AI kind of going, just in whether that be in general or specifically from more of a marketing perspective, but just as you think about it, given your background and experience, where do you see kind of that path taking us?
Yeah, I think the patterns are starting to emerge very clearly where AI is becoming more and more powerful. But obviously, to harness that power, you need a certain mindset and skill set in your marketing team. But I think like the what we are seeing, in our own product and in the market, I think is the early signs of maybe agentic AI, which can truly automate at scale. It can almost be like adding a lot more headcount to your team, essentially, and being able to do things that you previously thought were too time intensive, or you would put on the side even though you realized there was value in there. One example of that is like ongoing optimization. So when you think about ongoing experimentation and optimization and new types of personalization, traditionally you would think that someone comes up with an idea. How about we use this data element to personalize this experience on this one channel? You would set up an experiment, you would build a creative, you would do all of that and then measure, the results. And then that cycle just for one experiment might take like a month or 2 months in the best case, right? And you might be short on staffing. And I think what we are seeing with some of the things we are rolling out in Blue Shift is that now we are able to 10x, 50x the scale of that experimentation, where AI is coming up with the ideas. It's able to, come up with almost all the elements needed to execute on the idea. It needs the marketer to approve it, obviously, because I think like AI is still, in a place where it might, it probably doesn't have the same level of brand control and voice and all that, but it can get you 90% there. And then marketers can maybe with a click of a few buttons say, yes, approved, looks good, or add these kind of brand controls and then go at it. And, suddenly with that kind of a flow, we are seeing that, work that was previously considered valuable but time consuming is now being done at 10x kind of scale. So that definitely is like a future of marketing. I think like the marketing teams, um, I'm sure you've seen this, but even when I talk to marketing leaders at large companies, I've never heard anyone say I have a very big marketing team. I always hear like our marketing team is very small. And I think, and I think over time we've all come to expect marketers to do more and more with small teams, which is somewhat unfair. But finally, I think like AI can, be that resource that unlocks all the power in those teams, and lets them do things at scale. And I think marketing teams can become much more influential in that customer journey. They can become much more strategic. They can become more creative, I think, because I think the first phase of maybe automation, which was not fully AI driven, but just rule based, in you know, I would offer that almost limited marketers' creativity. It actually made them just button clickers and forced them to just do a lot of operational work. And I think now if AI can take on that operational work, it can let marketers be great at what they are great at, which is the storytelling, the strategy, the customer empathy. And I think hopefully that partnership will work really well. So that's where I see all this going, where Hopefully a few years from now, marketers are still, the real teams might still be smallish, but they would feel like they have an army of operators to kind of help them, while they can focus a lot more on creativity, strategy, and kind of driving that customer connection and empathy forward.
We're big believers here that the modern marketer and definitely the future marketer is a technical marketer, right? That there is definitely going to need to be that mix of I need to understand what's happening from a technical standpoint, what the capabilities are from a technical standpoint, in order to make that proper translation to the IT and the product folks and the things they're doing, because that post-click experience that we live in, that we focus on, right? After someone interacts with the ad, right? Once they get to the site, the app, whatever the case is, that mix of marketing, IT, and product really needs to be in alignment, right? It's got to be in lockstep if you're going to move people right along their journey. If you're going to create customer retention, if you're going to drive lifetime value. Um, when you think about the future of marketing, what does that technical marketer look like to you?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think I sort of agree, but I also maybe want to take it in a slightly different direction where, as technology evolves, you don't need to be technical in the same way as you needed to be when technology was kind of difficult to use. I think the direction where AI is kind of going is where AI would be much easier for, um, you know, somebody less technical in the sense of coding kind of technology, maybe a few years from now, right? And even now, I'm sure there's in the zeitgeist, there's a lot of chatter about vibe coding and all of that in the true technical domain, where people are saying I need much less technical skills to do technical stuff, right? And I think that as that happens, I think like you still have to have that mindset of like understanding kind of like the understanding what the technology is doing. Maybe you don't need to be technical at the level of like kind of coding it, but you still need to be technical to know what is it not technology doing? How does that impact our business? How does, the point you made about the alignment between different functions? And I think marketers need to understand kind of like, obviously functionally, how does it impact product as a team, but also product as a customer experience touch point, right? And sales as a customer experience touch point, and support as a customer experience touch point. So how do you kind of like have that full understanding of like how it impacts all of those different pieces? I think knowing that would become more and more important. I think we would probably still call it technical, but it may not be the kind of technical today where you have to really learn to code and write complex coding. Some of that will become much simpler, but you still need to have like a understanding of the logic and the technology kind of behind it, if you will.
100% agree. Yeah, I think I think we're saying the same thing, right? It's not the matter of marketers don't need to become engineers. They don't need to become developers by any stretch of the imagination, but they need to know enough of the language to get some context around what's happening, right? So I think about the fact that my parents, they both speak fluent French. I speak very little French. I don't speak it fluently by any stretch of the imagination. But if you drop me off in the middle of France, I know enough to survive, right? Like I'll live, I won't starve, right? I won't die, right? And I know enough French to get by. So I think about that from a marketer standpoint. You don't need to be able to build these applications, right? You don't need to be able to be a data engineer. You don't need to be able to code a website or a web application or anything like that. But you need to know enough to be able to survive in an intelligent conversation about it. And as you made the nice point, to have that context of understanding, how does product play a role in this? How does IT play a role in this, right? How does engineering play a role in this? So that you can see how all those things those pieces and parts all kind of come together to ultimately deliver the experience that you may be responsible as a marketer for delivering for your organization. So definitely aligned on that, and definitely I think a great place to kind of close our interview. Thank you so much, BJ, for your time. Really appreciate it. We know how precious your time is running a company, running a SaaS provider like Blue Shift, and we're so happy to have you.
Thank you. It was great. And thank you again for having me.